Ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kaka, ka tangi hoki hao te he mauri ora. Ena mana, ena reo aura rakatira mā tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnei ka tō te raro o te maru o ka mana whenua, ka te māmoe waitaha kaitahu, nau mai, hara mai, tautu mai. I stand here under the cloak of the people of this place, ka te māmoe waitaha kaitahu, and welcome you here to our Distinguished Research Medal Lecture. Ki te whare tūnei, tēnā koe, tūtonu, and to the house that stands here, may you stand forever. And e mate haere hoki atu rā ki te po, and may we remember with sadness those that have passed. Ko waiau, no ōtapoti ahau, ko kautarani te iwi, he kaimāhi ahau, o tāko whakaihu waka ko Richard Blakey tāko wingoa. Kia ora everyone, I'm Richard Blakey, Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and Enterprise here at the University of Otago. It's my great pleasure to be your MC today for this Distinguished Research Medal lecture for Professor John Crump. We're very, very pleased to welcome you here. To the members of the academic party, te tūmu whakarei Vice-Chancellor, tēnā koe. To Araki, Professor Jacinta Ruru, Professor Diane Sukapotanu, Professor Megan Givens, and of course to Professor John Crump, our Distinguished Research Medal awardee, tēnā koutou. Also to the proud members of the Centre and the Division, members of the African Students Association led by your President Nyasha Kawara, to colleagues online and in person from the wider university community, members of the public, and I think we've got a great number of people from our communities, those watching overseas probably, and other parts of Aotearoa. If I've missed anyone, welcome to you as well. Nau mai, hara mai, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here. It is the tradition for the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research to officiate at this lecture, as it is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research that chairs the panel that makes the selection every year for our highest research medal awardee. My role, therefore, is to tell you a little bit about the award before I hand over to Professor Givens as PVC for Health Sciences to more formally introduce our speaker for you today. Should the hui go to plan, and should you all agree by acclamation at the end, I will also have the privilege of inviting the Vice-Chancellor to present the medal to John, and then you can have a little look at it and talk to him afterwards. No time for questions, because we've got a class coming in here afterwards. For those in person, at a cup of tea at the staff club. So, just a little bit of information. The Distinguished Research Medal has regulations that state that the successful recipient will be chosen for their outstanding research achievements, sustained contributions to the research environment, impact on the academic disciplines and or communities with which the research has been engaged, and service to the university. Such contributions can include leadership of significant national or international research activities, sustained mentorship or development of researchers, and outstanding service to iwi, government, industry, and other community partners. I'm sure that you will all know, and we will see today, that Professor Crump has met these criteria at the highest standards, particularly in the international context. All of the evidence and comments from John's nominators and international referees reinforced this, with one of the clearest summaries coming from one of his nominators from the 2022 Chalmers Medal, which is a medal that John has from the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, who stated publicly, quote, "Professor Crump's research has changed the way that we study and think about fever in the tropics. Since fever is the fundamental clinical problem in our field, his work touches millions of patients needing healthcare in poorly resourced areas every day," end quote. With citations such as this, the Medal Award Committee were very pleased to be able to recommend you for this award, John, and the Vice-Chancellor was, I think, very pleased to be able to confirm that recommendation. And on behalf of them and the rest of the university research community, congratulations. The medal comes with the invitation to present this public lecture, or hui, which is why we're here today, and a modest grant to support research-related activities, some of which we may also hear about today. So on with the proceedings. It's now my pleasure to invite Associate Professor Megan Givens to come forward to provide the formal introductions to Professor Crump ahead of his Distinguished Research Medal lecture. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Rekatira mā, tēnā koutou. E te hāpori, nau mai, oku hoa mahi o tāko whakaihu waka, nau mai. Whānau, nau mai. Haere mai e tēnei hui. Ka mihi maiawa, kia koutou a hui mai nei e tēnei wā. A good afternoon, everyone. It's a true privilege to introduce a globally respected leader in infectious disease, global health and medical microbiology, Professor John Andrew Crump. Professor Crump is a New Zealand-born infectious disease physician, medical microbiologist and epidemiologist. He currently serves as a Professor of Medicine, Pathology and Global Health here at the University of Otago and holds an adjunct professorship at the same disciplines at Duke University in the United States. He is also the director of the Otago Global Health Institute, one of our university's flagship research centres. Born in Oamaru and raised on a farm at Okaramio, Professor Crump attended Havelock School and Marlborough Boys School. He graduated with his MBCHB in 1993 from the University of Otago and later completed his MD in 2013, focusing on HIV in Tanzania. He also earned a diploma in tropical medicine and hygiene from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in 1995. His postgraduate training spans New Zealand, the UK, Australia and the US, and he holds fellowships from the Royal Australasian College of Physicians, the Royal College of Pathologists of Australasia and the Royal College of Physicians UK. He also served as an Epidemic Intelligence Service Officer with the US Centres for Disease Control and Prevention. Professor Crump's primary research interest is the diagnosis, management and prevention of fever in the tropics, particularly invasive bacterial diseases and bacterial and viral zoonoses. He has been a leading advocate for moving beyond a disease-specific approach to febrile illness, promoting a comprehensive syndrome-based model that better reflects the realities of healthcare in low and middle-income countries. His work has helped uncover the true burden of neglected tropical diseases, including brucellosis, leptospirosis, Q fever, rickets and Rift Valley fever. He has also led major studies on typhoid and paratyphoid fever and invasive non-typhoidal Salmonella disease, contributing to global efforts in diagnosis, vaccine development and deployment. Professor Crump's research is deeply transdisciplinary, embracing the One Health approach, collaborating with veterinarians, ecologists and social scientists to address the interconnectedness of human, animal and environmental health. Beyond his scientific contributions, Professor Crump has played a key role in shaping global health ethics, concerned about the unintended consequences of short-term global health training in low-resource settings. He co-chaired the Wellcome Trust-funded WAIT working group, which developed ethical guidelines for responsible global health training. More recently, he has contributed important commentary on the problem of health nationalism when facing infectious diseases that cross borders, reminding us of our obligation to distance others, a theme of his talk today. He has also served in advisory roles to the World Health Organization, including on the burden of invasive Salmonella typhoid vaccine policy, Salmonella vaccine development and preparedness for bacterial disease with pandemic potential. Professor Crump's work has been recognised with numerous prestigious awards. The James Steele Veterinary Public Health Award from the US CDC in 2005, the Bailey H. Ashford Medal from the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene in 2012, the Dean's Medal for Research Excellence from the University of Otago in 2021, the Chalmers Medal from the Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene in 2022, and most recently, and what we are here to celebrate today, the University of Otago Distinguished Research Medal. He has published over 320 scientific manuscripts, been cited more than 60,000 times, and was named a Clarivat Highly Cited Researcher in 2020. In every aspect of his career, John exemplifies the highest standards of scientific excellence, ethical leadership, and global collaboration. His work continues to shape the future of global health and inspire the next generation of researchers and clinicians. But before we welcome Professor John Crump to speak to us, I would like to welcome the African Students Association, who are going to perform ahead of John's talk. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Rihanna Warsame, and I have the great honor to speak in front of all of you guys today on behalf of the African Students Association. First and foremost, we want to acknowledge how grateful we are to be invited here by Professor Crump, following his work in East Africa, which shaped his life experience. It means a lot for us to see platforms like this open their doors to a wide variety of voices, especially from student groups like ours. Today, I wanted to use my little time here in front of you all to speak about something that often gets overlooked when we're talking about research. Not the experiments, the data, or the research itself, but the people behind it. Of course, research is about all the things that I've previously mentioned, but research at its core is about asking questions. And just as importantly, it's about the people who are asking them. There is something powerful yet simple about the value of diverse perspectives. When I say diverse perspectives, I don't want you guys to be mistaken for where people come from, but more importantly, about the different way of thinking, the different life experiences, and the different values that create new ideas. Representation matters, and not only in our classrooms and our communities, but also places where knowledge is created, in research labs, academic journals, and in universities. Diversity in research isn't just about fairness, but it's about making the research better. More diverse perspectives allows for more creativity when we bring people with differences together. Different perspectives is an important piece of the pie. Why, you ask? Because the methods that we use and even how we might interpret those numbers is shaped by our lived experiences and assumptions. So let's keep pushing for spaces where differences are not only brung together and accepted, but celebrated. Because together, we can truly listen to one another and move forward together. So that's all from me. And we brought a little presentation for you all, so hopefully you guys enjoy it. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, ngā Santiani sana to Kofi Fuga, the drummers and the African Student Association for the reflections and for the rousing performance. And yeah, we were just saying I'm going to struggle to keep the energy level so high the rest of the talk. Thank you very much. Yeah. An African flavour, I think, is appropriate as an opening way for several reasons. Yesterday was actually Africa Day, and as mentioned, the theme, unity and diversity, is very appropriate. So apologies, we're a day late, but I hope you got a flavour there. Second, it's worth remembering that demographers predict that by the year 2100, the African region in red will be close to overtaking Asia in blue as the world's most populous region. So there's a big future in Africa. And while for the time being, Africa also remains a focus of a lot of the world's preventable illness and premature death. Third, as mentioned, I owe a debt of gratitude to African colleagues. I spent a decade of my career working full-time in Tanzania, and collaborators in Tanzania and neighbouring countries remain major research partners for me today and a quarter of a century later. And fourth, a focus of my talk today is about our obligations to others, irrespective of who they are and where they live. I chose a Makonde carving from southern Tanzania to represent this in the poster for my lecture, shown on your right, and I've also got it here, hoping no one knocks it over. This is Ijuma, or Tree of Life style of Makonde carving. It represents a family tree and human interconnectedness, featuring streams of people engaged in daily activities. It's all carved out of a single piece of wood, usually ebony, as is the case with this piece. And I'll be discussing interconnectedness of people today, including the shared challenges and obligations that arise from this. Thanks to the Genographic project launched in 2005, it's possible for any of us to see how we're part of the wider family tree of all people. Using mitochondrial DNA that's passed relatively unchanged from mother to daughter down the female line, or typing Y chromosomal DNA passed relatively unchanged from father to son down the male line, provides amazing insights into our deep ancestry. My family's getting nervous at this point, I know. For your entertainment, I arranged for my Y chromosome to be genotyped. This is a photograph of my 3 times great-grandfather, my most distant male line ancestor with a surviving photograph. He was born in the late 1700s in Kingsland, Herefordshire, England. And it's at this point that I thank my mum, who's sitting there, for not naming me Frodo. And my earliest known male line ancestor by conventional genealogy is my 8th great-grandfather, also Thomas, also born in Herefordshire around 1620. So barring any non-paternity events, which are always a possibility, these 2 Thomas Crumps should have the same Y chromosome that I do, which types out as Y haplogroup R1b, or more specifically RM269, and is haplotype RFT167506. And when you put my Y chromosome in the global database of Y chromosome variants by location from the Genographic project and its derivative databases that have been built out from Y DNA typing of traditional residents from more than 140 countries, we get this migration map of bearers of my Y chromosome that trace back to a Y DNA ancestor in Africa 230,000 years before present. But the point, much to the relief of my family, is not to bore you with my family history, but rather to illustrate that everyone in this room, whether they're from Zimbabwe, England, Te Whenua, Brazil, also shares this common ancestor, a person in Africa around 230,000 years ago, whose lineage happens to be the one which all living humans today descend from. And this was a person among many others alive at the time, of course, whose lineages happen not to survive through to today. So the bad news is that you're all verifiably my cousins, and this might also come with some obligations. And I would note here that these ideas are encompassed in the concern for strangers found in Manakitanga. But for today's talk, I've taken inspiration from the French historian of ideas, Michel Foucault, whose famous quote is translated here quite awkwardly, so I'll try to read it without errors. People know what they do. Frequently, they know why they do what they do. But what they don't know is what they do does. So I've chosen not as much to talk about what I do, except for the purposes of illustration here or there during the talk. And I wanted to talk more about the why of what I do. I think many of you my age or older have likely revisited the why at times for various reasons. and I think about it in global health frequently. The rationale for helping people beyond borders is often contested, including public universities, where it's very easy for the state to influence a drive to focus inwards towards those matters of immediate national self-interest. And this is being also challenged during a period of intense pressure on the liberal or rules-based international order. I'll perhaps save what I do does that bit. Certainly the most challenging of all questions when considering indirect and higher order effects of actions for a future swan song. Now, global health focuses on health issues that can transcend national boundaries, requires global cooperation and transdisciplinary problem solving, covers the spectrum from clinical care to disease prevention, and is interested in improved health for those least well off. This way of working across disciplines can be illustrated with the idea of the T-shaped person, someone who has deep disciplinary expertise, and you've already heard about what that is for me, but also able to work across disciplines and cultures to leverage wide expertise and experience to work on complex global issues that sometimes extend to existential challenges of humans. And this talk will also attempt to pay tribute to my colleagues in disciplines well beyond health sciences and humanities, who I think often deal best with the why questions, as well as in commerce and sciences, who have taught me a lot over the years. As such, I'm going to start by thanking the many colleagues who helped me review aspects of this talk and add that any errors are my responsibility rather than theirs. I won't routinely call out these disciplines or colleagues as I go, but I'd instead request that you remain conscious of them as I'm going through, and I think it'll be fairly obvious as I switch. So let's start with a thought experiment from moral philosopher Peter Singer. On the next slide is a video clip I'd like you to watch.
It's a story that's deeply unsettled millions in China. Footage of a 2-year-old girl hit by a van and left bleeding in the street by passers-by. Footage too graphic to be shown. The entire accident is caught on camera. The driver pauses after hitting the child. Back wheels seen resting on her for over a second. In 2 minutes, 3 people pass 2-year-old Wang Yu by. First walks around the badly injured toddler completely. Others look at her before moving off.
So there are other people who walked past Wang Yu that day. A second van ran over her legs before a street cleaner raised the alarm. She was rushed to hospital, but it was too late and she had died. I wonder how many of you watching this thought, I wouldn't have done that, I would have stopped to help. Maybe raise your hands if the thought occurred to you. Yeah, it's most of you, and I'm sure you're right, I believe you. But before you give yourself too much credit, have a look at this.
It's a story that's
not
deeply
that.
unsettled million.
This. There we go. This is the State of the World's Children 2024 report from UNICEF, showing that in 2023, 4.8 million children worldwide died before the age of 5 years, most from preventable or poverty-related diseases. And that's more than 13,000 child deaths per day. And UNICEF thinks that's good news since the figure's been steadily declining from 12.6 million deaths in under 5-year-olds in 1990. Does it really matter that we're not walking past them on the street? Does it matter that most of these deaths happen in places far away from here? Many think that it doesn't make a morally relevant difference. But then the question becomes, how can we contribute to saving those 13,000 children dying every day? Can we do it? And I think the answer there's also yes. First of all, we know quite precisely where most of these deaths happen. This map shows the rate of child deaths per 100,000 per year for 2021 at the national level, with countries in dark red having the highest child death rates and countries in dark blue the lowest. You'll see, as I alluded to earlier, that countries with the highest under 5-year-old death rate are concentrated in Africa. And not shown here, we also have quite a good picture of where child deaths happen at a subnational level. Second, we also know in great detail what these children are dying of, illustrated for 2021 in this figure. We have evidence-based strategies to prevent many of these deaths, while for others there's considerable work and investment going on to develop evidence to prevent them. For example, I, with many other colleagues, work intensively on prevention by vaccines and other means. One of the causes shown here, invasive non-typhoidal salmonella, or INTS disease, in the yellow box. And third, we also know, thanks to tools online like GiveWell, shown here, which charities and organisations deliver the most cost-effective and highly impactful interventions to prevent child deaths from many of these causes. GiveWell currently ranks the charity medicines to prevent malaria at the top, where $7 can protect one child against malaria, a major cause of child death. And then beyond charitable giving by individuals, state and multilateral health policy also tends to direct investing in the most effective interventions for the most important health outcomes. As I'll discuss later, multilateral support for health is in serious jeopardy at present. Given this knowledge, interventions and evidence, why do most of us then tend to act more like the people who walked past Wang Yu? The issue of moral distance in health is obviously a really complex matter. So let's try another thought experiment around the concept of the postcode lottery, a widely understood idea linked to healthcare access in New Zealand. My mum, she's featuring here again, and no doubt not appreciating the attention, lives in postcode 7178 on a farm in rural Marlborough. If she experienced an acute medical event, an ambulance would likely come from the nearby town of Havelock or Renwick, and she would have a 26-minute ride over 30 kilometres to Wairoa Hospital. And depending on the diagnosis and management, she might then need to be transferred onward to Wellington or Christchurch Hospital. By contrast, I live in postcode 9016 in the gritty streets of Dunedin Central. If I experienced the same medical event as Pam, the ambulance would come from just round the corner, transport me less than 1 kilometre, a journey of about 5 minutes, to one of the South Island's most advanced tertiary hospitals. These postcode differences would likely be highly consequential to my mum's outcome versus mine, all other things being the same. Now that I've made you feel bad for my mum, I'm really pulling out the stops here, it's notable that we have even less choice about the country we're born in than the postcode we live in, yet country of birth is highly consequential for our health prospects. This is the country code lottery. This graph shows a measure of wealth on the x-axis, national gross domestic product per capita purchasing power parity in 2021 international dollars, and a measure of social value on the y-axis. Here I've opted to stick with the metric that I started with, child survival, now expressed as a proportion of live births surviving to 5 years of age. Here's a country with a 2021 GDP per capita purchasing power parity mean of $45,000 and a child survival of 99.5%. However, it's not that simple because GDP per capita varies considerably within countries. In this country, if you're in the wealthiest quintile, the top 20%, your GDP per capita was $103,000, and child survival in this quintile 99.6%. Whereas if you're in the lowest quintile, your GDP per capita was dramatically lower at $19,000 and child survival 99.2%. And this country happens to be New Zealand. Let's look at another country in red, the larger circle representing its 2021 population of 100 million, 20 times that of New Zealand. This country's 2021 GDP per capita was $6,260, and the child survival was considerably lower than New Zealand, sitting at 91.8%. In this country, if you're in the wealthiest quintile, your mean GDP per capita was $23,000 and child survival in this quintile 95.1%. Whereas if you're in the lowest wealth quintile, your mean GDP per capita was dramatically lower at $25,000 and child survival just 90.2%. This country is the Democratic Republic of Congo, a place that I've had the good fortune to work in recent years on INTS disease that I mentioned earlier. But even The least wealthy quintile in New Zealand has a similar per capita GDP as the wealthy Congolese, but even the wealthiest Congolese experience markedly lower child survival than the least wealthy New Zealanders, for reasons like the nature of health services, challenges with wider infrastructure in the environment. And Congolese child survival declines precipitously with declining wealth quintile. So if we're worried about the postcode lottery in New Zealand, should we not also be concerned about the global country code lottery? Here, I think disciplines like history, classical studies, philosophy, theology, politics, and ethics, to name a few, are indispensable. So let's start with some classical philosophy. This figure illustrates a perspective of the Roman Stoic philosopher Cicero, whose do officius, or on obligations, set out circles of responsibility, starting with ourselves, our family, fellow citizens, countrymen, and all peoples. Noting that we instinctively prefer to concern ourselves with those closest and most similar to ourselves than those further away and more alien. But recognizing that functioning communities that we desire depend on attention to social and moral duties, requiring that we draw the outer circle inwards. And identify that inflicting harm or failing to help, especially those least well off, represent grave injustices. Now, when I was preparing this talk, I didn't anticipate that this topic, or this kind of topic, would become the source of a Twitter or X battle between US Vice President and the now Pope Leo XIV. But Vance argued that ordo amoris, the conception on degrees of obligations associated with the writings of Augustine and Aquinas, implies that it's only after taking care of the needs of fellow citizens, quite narrowly defined, that we can consider helping others. And the then Cardinal Robert Prevost, among others, arguing that our concern should be equally to all, irrespective of citizenship. A perspective addressed among other places in the parable of the Good Samaritan or the Compassionate Samaritan, a story that may be known to some of you. In some ways, it serves as a popular shorthand for the idea that it's good to help other people, or perhaps even a cliche of a do-gooder. But a deeper read shows that it's primarily a challenge to our preference to narrow our obligations to the inner circle of those closest to ourselves. Here, a religious scholar testing Jesus' understanding and adherence to the Torah asks, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus responds with a question, which is, "What is written in the law?" At which point the religious scholar cites Torah scripture from Deuteronomy and Leviticus, summarizing Mosaic law in classical style as, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and your neighbors as yourself." Having cited the golden rule, the religious scholar poses what I think is a more personal question, asking, "But who is my neighbor?" After all, a highly consequential outcome here hinges on how "who is my neighbor" is defined. At which point the illustrative story intended to address this more personal question proceeds. So with apologies for the artwork that might invoke bad memories of Sunday school for some, in brief, a male victim of crime who is intentionally unidentified by ethnicity or other background lies naked and half dead on the side of a dangerous road from Jerusalem down to Jericho in the Jordan Rift Valley. And a priest and Levite, who are privileged members of Judean society of exemplary piety, presumably journeying away from the temple and duties in Jerusalem, see the victim and yet pass by on the other side. By contrast, a Samaritan traveller, who the priest and Levite would have viewed as a socio-religious outcast, sees the victim, is moved with compassion, goes to him and cares for him despite the peril of doing so, giving his own goods and money without arrangements for reciprocation. And leaving aside the identity of the victim and centering the act of compassion on a Samaritan, a person who would have been understood to be morally inferior by the passers-by, the implication of the story becomes clear. The obligation to assist isn't limited to close circles, and everyone is my neighbour. This was no doubt disappointing news to the religious scholar, and perhaps a challenge to us all. The tension between special obligations or particularism and universality of concern have been wrestled with by many and continue to the present day. And this could perhaps be summarised by this figure. On your left, we have altruism, or the idea that interests or well-being of others come first. And on the right, egoism, the idea that actions should be based on self-interest. And positions in the middle, like enlightened self-interest, the idea that good deeds should be rewarded. You can probably think of challenges with most of these positions. For example, a challenge with pure altruism is that you can only really help someone else if you look after yourself enough to do so. Sometimes called the oxygen mask principle, familiar from air travel safety briefings. So let's think through these alternatives in relation to global health and development. This figure illustrates the global population by income per day by world region in 1960, which was the beginning of the first United Nations development decade. In 1960, 51% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty, defined as an income of $2 or less per day. The vast majority of people living in extreme poverty at the time were in Asia in pink, followed by Africa in turquoise. Wealth was concentrated in Europe and North America, and the focus was on how wealthy countries could alleviate extreme poverty and improve health in poor countries. Not a great deal of progress was made in the 1960s, although the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, was formed by executive order of US President John F. Kennedy in 1961, not just as an act of pure altruism, though. It was also very much as a means of garnering influence, often referred to as soft power during the Cold War years and beyond. Then in 1970, the United Nations General Assembly passed Resolution 262625 on the International Development Strategy for the second United Nations development decade. To quote, "Each economically advanced country will progressively increase its official development assistance to the developing countries and will exert its best efforts to reach a minimum net amount of 0.7% of its gross national product at market prices in the middle of the decade," which was, of course, by the mid-1970s. Only Denmark, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden reached this level by that date. So fast forward to today, this slide shows official development assistance as a percent of gross national income on the y-axis, by year on the x-axis. I'm going to illustrate the considerable variation in the extent to which high-income countries adhere to the 1970 commitment by using Norway, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand as examples. This line represents the level of the UN General Assembly resolution. Norway in red has been among the top contributing nations, consistently exceeding the 1970s targets. The United Kingdom in blue, which was historically not meeting this target in 2005, along with other G8 countries, promised to raise aid, spending to 0.7% by 2013 and achieved this goal. However, as you can see from 2022 forward, this commitment wavered as a result of financial impacts of the pandemic and increased investment in defence, something that, as you'll be aware, has accelerated due to uncertainties about the US commitment to the North Atlantic Defence Umbrella in recent weeks. Finally, New Zealand in black is well known for being at the back of the class among high-income countries in foreign aid, consistently tracking at 0.3% or less of gross national income, a topic that really raises concern among New Zealanders, present company excluded, of course. How does New Zealand's official development assistance look on the spectrum of altruism to national self-interest? There are lots of ways to look at this question. One way is to plot a measure of social value, and I'm sticking with child deaths again, on the primary axis against, on the primary y-axis against global regions on the x-axis. As you will know from my earlier slides, most deaths in children shown in red occur in Africa, followed by Asia, and we live in the global region with the least deaths among children under 5 years of age. New Zealand Aid prioritised support to avert deaths among children. We might expect the distribution of New Zealand official development assistance to mirror this metric of social value. However, New Zealand Aid in fact follows the opposite pattern shown in green. And this is in part, of course, because New Zealand Aid is weighted towards national self-interest exercise of soft power in a highly contested part of the world where New Zealand is an increasingly small player. Another way to look at this is the extent to which official development assistance is administered by the part of the government that manages foreign affairs on the spectrum from altruism to egoism. If official development assistance is illustrated in green and national foreign policy in blue, donor country aid and development functions tend to be separated from national ministries of foreign affairs when the needs of recipients are prioritised, and are deeply embedded in ministries of foreign affairs when national self-interest uses aid primarily as a tool of soft power, and be placed somewhat at arm's length in the middle. At present, Sweden's probably closest to the version on the left of this figure, but for perhaps obvious reasons, no country cuts development completely loose. And New Zealand, Australia, and the United Kingdom experimented with distancing foreign aid from foreign policy objectives in the middle, but all have moved towards a pattern on the right in recent years, bringing development squarely back under the authority of foreign affairs ministries. And at this point in 2025, it's hard to avoid comment on recent news, which is deleting much of the green circle of official development assistance, as has happened in the United States in recent months. Internal USAID documents estimate that shuttering the US President's malaria initiative, just one component of US foreign aid, will cost the lives of up to 160,000 children per year if this tab's not picked up. And these kinds of impacts, I think, blur the lines between soft and hard power, since few acts of war could achieve such consequential results. And from a foreign policy and international relations perspective, 2025 sees the creation of a massive soft power vacuum in low middle income countries, including those in Africa, the major centre of human population growth over the present century. And time will tell who fills it and what implications that will have. What implications that'll have. Another way to think about these matters is through the lens of nationalism. This is a really complex topic to cover briefly, but nationalism may be defined as an exclusionary ideology prioritising nationals over non-nationals. And the late political scientist and historian Benedict Anderson, whose brilliant book on nationalism called Imagined Communities, points out that nationalism is probably the most widely accepted and deeply held belief system of humans. Perhaps one that we're rarely aware of, but one that I think we should pay more attention to in the current global climate. This pervasive belief system is illustrated, for example, by the strong affinity that we may feel towards compatriots despite never having met the vast majority of them. And the abstract concept of a nation being one of the few ideas that humans are willing to die for without a great deal of coercion. There are several typologies of nationalism and all generate outgroups, but I'm going to focus on liberal or civic nationalism as an idealised inclusive form of nationalism that achieves social solidarity by mitigating and operating above ethnic, racial, religious and other differences. In liberal nationalism, the outgroup can be outside the classically conceived Westphalian nation, but may extend to those within who don't abide with the ideals of the nation. How does New Zealand look? Well, this high-profile story and headline caught my eye in March 2020 when I was living overseas and really set me off with a number of other colleagues in the engrossing work on nationalism in general and health nationalism specifically. I'll just give you a moment to read it. I think there are a couple of remarkable things about this quote. On one hand, it encompasses some of the solidarity building language that underpinned New Zealand's initially successful pandemic response, required a high level of social cohesion to do something challenging for the national good. On the other hand, it also reflects a highly statist framing of a transnational problem, a lack of concern for non-nationals, and notable, I think, that it didn't really raise eyebrows among New Zealanders at the time. But continued to be a prominent theme in the New Zealand media during this period. And I can commend the excellent work of University of Otago bioethics PhD student Emma Anderson, if you want to read more about that. So we might wonder how nationalistic is New Zealand. This, of course, depends on how you define nationalism and attempt to measure it. But this figure from foreign policy draws on data from the National Identity and Citizenship modules of the International Social Survey Program. Scores of composite metrics of nationalism are represented on the left axis and GDP per capita on the right. If you focus on the left axis, you might be surprised to see New Zealand shown in yellow sits in the quartile with the highest composite metrics of nationalism alongside countries like Venezuela, the United States and Japan. And as a reminder where we've come from with nationalism in New Zealand, those old enough might remember the 1970s publicly sponsored National Esteem campaign playing on the one television channel that we had at the time with the jingle, "If anybody can, a Kiwi can. We can have pride in ourselves again. So come on, Kiwi, come on." I think I'm getting some smiles. Yeah. But by the early 2020s, there was endemic and widespread use of national identity and nationalism in advertising. For example, the Kiwi Bank This Is Kiwi campaign was an advertisement appealing to national pride by highlighting a string of New Zealand achievements, including Rocket Lab, electric farm bikes, Airbirds footwear, banker software, advances in primary production, the Broods, and world-beating yacht design. In just 4 decades, it seemed that New Zealand had gone from needing a publicly funded self-esteem building campaign to understanding that we're pretty much the best. And reflect on your own experiences of the queasiness of watching similar advertising in other countries. In this context, let me finish with a few final slides that take the temperature on New Zealand and New Zealanders' positions on the question of who's my neighbour. If we look at health research, the New Zealand Health Research Council, having a quite cosmopolitan, distant history, today has among the most intensely statist-focused statements of purpose of any high-income country. We're here to improve the health and well-being of New Zealanders, all New Zealanders. A breathtaking example of national self-interest, and for people like me, quite an odd take. The Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, or CEPI, established about 10 years ago by mostly high-income countries and some non-state funders to prepare for pandemics, is an example of an enlightened self-interest research funding strategy. We've just received funding to work on the feasibility of phase 3 vaccine trials for Rift Valley fever, a neglected disease of livestock and poor livestock keepers in Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. My Tanzanian and international human and veterinary health colleagues have worked on this devastating disease for years, despite few resources. It periodically kills livestock en masse, sickening people who have contact with infected animals and causing a human illness similar to Ebola virus disease. But high-income countries didn't really care about it until its pandemic potential was identified. Indeed, New Zealand is today an investor in CEPI, not, I might posit, primarily out of concern for poor livestock keepers in Africa, but being conscious that the diseases on CEPI's list could spread to New Zealand, and in the case of Rift Valley fever, would devastate New Zealand's livestock agriculture sector if established here. Finally, on a more cosmopolitan note, through some outstanding science funding strategy, New Zealand became a member of the very large Horizon Europe Research and Innovation Programme in 2023. That includes, among other key programs, the European and Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership. So let's hope we stay engaged with these more outwardly looking funders. And if we look at New Zealand's national strategies to address transnational global health problems, like the recent one on antimicrobial resistance, 2007 document on ethical values for pandemics, and a recent report on lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic, without criticising the authors of these documents, many of whom I know because they're working within the terms of reference provided, all three tend to focus intensely on how New Zealand should respond internally to protect itself, and are almost silent on any obligations that New Zealand might have to non-compatriots or to contributing to global deliberations or efforts. On a positive note, though, I'm delighted that the 2025 update on epidemic and pandemic ethics has a specific recommendation on investing in global cooperation and recognises the importance not only of national solidarity, but also international solidarity among all humans. I applaud the committee members, many of whom are from the University of Otago, for breaking the mould on this. And my point here is really to highlight that nationalism is so pervasive and banal that it's easy to miss unless you're attuned to it, even when it operates in plain sight and when it generates absurd positions on global issues. I've talked quite a lot about state positions, but what are the views and behaviours of New Zealanders as private citizens with respect to transnational concerns? Well, research suggests that New Zealanders tend to support sharing scarce pandemic resources internationally, support distributing resources globally according to need, and furthermore, New Zealanders are among the most generous donors to charity across high-income countries. Yet research from colleagues from the University of Otago's own Department of Economics show that New Zealanders assign a low share of their giving to international development charities, and as such, we tend to neglect those that could do the most good per dollar spent, like the ones that save the lives of children by preventing malaria that I mentioned at the start of the talk. So let me make some concluding remarks. First, New Zealanders are generous, or at least like to think of themselves as such, but tend to focus their giving on domestic concerns, suggesting a high degree of preference for matters close to home. At the same time, New Zealand's state and foreign policy is oriented quite intently towards self-interest. Second, numerous existential problems of all humans loom large, both in health, the environment, and beyond. And these problems grow while isolationism and nationalism are on the rise globally, narrowing the conception of who counts as my neighbour. Yet transnational problems require transdisciplinary problem solving and close global cooperation and coordination. Here, universities can play a major role, and all disciplines are essential, especially those from the humanities that help us, among many other things, with the why questions. And we need to remain aware when state agendas or global trends cause us to ignore matters that are out of our sight. The biggest challenges also present big opportunities, I think, for progress if we can work effectively with our neighbours in the broadest sense of the term, symbolised again with the Makonde carving and captured in the Africa Day theme of unity with diversity in the opening performance, reminding us that we're all in the same waka, whether we realise it or not, and perhaps whether we like it or not. Thanks for your attention, and thanks again to my colleagues in the Otago Global Health Institute and beyond, representing all 4 divisions of the university, for helping me to prepare this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I think you've served us well in this middle lecture. Question you've posed, who is our neighbour, and why we should grapple with the moral distance, I think, is quite right. You've expressed yourself as a true T-shaped academic, and it's now my pleasure to invite the Vice-Chancellor to present you with the 2024 Distinguished Research Medal.
Thank you.